Well,
okay,
in the update, it's not like Jesus came along and said, hey, in Exodus 21, where I was saying you could have slaves and beat them, we got that wrong, or you got that wrong. That correction's never given. That thing about, in Leviticus where we point out that women are worth 2/3 of that of a man, we got that wrong. None of that is corrected. In fact, the reason I say it got worse, although I didn't know we were going to go down the biblical route tonight, is that if you look at Jewish tradition, when you're dead, you sleep with your fathers. There's no real clear notion of an afterlife. And then with the introduction of the New Testament, what you get is infinite torture and punishment for finite crimes, which is immoral.
All right, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole at the moment, although I'd be perfectly happy to do it, if we get there. Well,
because they want us to go to questions here in a minute.
Oh, okay. So I want to address the rule system that you're putting together.
Okay.
Okay, so I was talking to a friend of mine who's an AI engineer. He's a very smart guy, and we've been talking about the foundations of cognition. Mm-hmm. And you know that artificial intelligence systems don't run on rules. Right.
Well, some of them do.
Well,
and certainly they run on an operating system that is full of rules.
That's actually not relevant in this case.
But that's the physical
because they could
foundation.
operate on all sorts of different operating systems.
Well,
but okay, so
but there's a foundation. The foundation I'm pointing to is the physical facts of the universe, and that would be roughly consistent with the hardware and the operating system that they're running on. But I'm sorry,
okay,
I interrupted.
No. I mean that's a reasonable objection too. But look, one of the things that happened and I think this is one of the problems with the we can generate a rational system of rules that can govern our behavior approach, is that since the 1980s, people have been trying to build rule-based expert systems that can do relatively simple things. Relatively simple. They're not that simple. Like basic medical diagnosis. They don't work. Rule-based systems don't work. You can't get them to operate intelligently, which is why machine learning came about to begin with. Because whatever machine learning is doing and allowing for predictions, it doesn't seem easily decomposable to a set of listable rules and a map of their interactions. The world doesn't seem to work that way. And I would say, back to the metaphysical substrate argument, you laid forward a set of propositions, and the reason I was perhaps inappropriately torturing you about them is because there's a metaphysic under them. There's something that's driving you to put those forward as reasonable. You say, well, they're self-evidently reasonable. See, my question is...
I didn't actually say it, but okay.
Well, it's something like that, because you said, well, reasonable people could agree on these three or something similar. It seems to me that what you're saying is that there's a set of finite axioms that reasonable people could conceivably agree on, from which you could generate a rule-based moral system. Have I got that wrong? I thought that's what you said.
It's curious, because I didn't say that, but it's very close to something that I have said in the past, which is, for any given situation, there's a finite set of actions that a person could take. And some set of those actions are better than others with respect to whatever the goal is. If the goal is to continue a decent life or improve the quality of your life, some set of one or more actions that you could take in this instant produces results that are better in ways that we would agree they're better. Like throwing Sam off the stage. If we were in that situation,
there must be an unconscious fantasy going on here or something, eh? Because we keep returning to that.
And it's fun. But one of the possible actions of this set of actions would be for me to throw him off the stage. Another possible set of action would be for me to, shield him. It is clear, and you can say that I'm just saying it's self-evident, it is clear that one of those is going to be more in Sam's best interest, and perhaps even more in mine, than another. That's all we're saying. We're not pretending remotely that we have the answer to every possible scenario, just that we have the foundational tool set that allows us to come up with the right answers. And we do this in opposition. Yeah, but you also
think that you can do that with a set of rules.
So first of all...
I actually don't think that's technically tenable. I don't think there's any evidence for that.
I don't know why it wouldn't be.
Well, you can't build expert systems, for example.
Well, you can't say that you can't, because...
Well, we've tried for about 40 years with no success.
Gee, 40 years out of 13.7 billion, and we haven't cracked it yet, so it's impossible?
No. But 40 years of exponentially increasing computational power with no solution on the horizon except for AI.
So, and the latest AI thing, which I absolutely love, because I'm a chess player, is the DeepMind AlphaZero thing that learned the entirety of what humans know about playing chess in 4 hours or so, and then beat the best previous chess computer. And people are saying, oh, it's the beginning of Skynet, because now we have this sort of thinking. However, that method produced better results of letting it play itself with chess, giving it no opening book, giving it no history of chess, nothing.
Well, that's my point.
It didn't give it no rules. It gave it the rules of chess and the goal of the game.
Yes, but it didn't give it rules about how to play the game.
Correct.
Right, and that's because rule-based systems about how to play a game aren't optimal.
No.
That's why.
What happened is the AI took the rules of how to play the game and what the winning goal is, and it experimented and found the best ways to achieve that goal. And I think that's what human beings have done throughout the entirety of history. We're beings in a physical universe. We have the rules. The goal is to survive, and I would say the goal should be to thrive. And we are continually finding the best rules and the best methods. This exactly mirrors the moral system I'm talking about. The idea that there is someone on high telling the computer, don't play h4 as your first move, we threw that out because that's not the best way to find out things. Instead, we plopped the computer down just as we were plopped down in a universe when we gained consciousness and began interacting. And the computer, in the span of a few hours, discovered everything that humanity has discovered about chess. And now they are applying it to the sort of diagnostic things you were talking about. I think that is directly analogous to what the best explanations of what human beings have done. And what happens, from my perspective, is that the thinking about morality is so difficult for some that it's just easier to say, this person told me, or this God told me, or this is the case. Because having to sit down and do the sort of life inventory to figure out, hey, what's best for us? I mean, even figuring out what the goal of the game is harder for some people, and so they accept and fall into these traps of like authoritarian models of this is what your goal is. And the thing that's probably frustrated me the most, which I talked about on a college campus last year, is if the government was running around dictating to people what their job was going to be, what their future was going to be, as some regimes have done, nobody would appreciate that. Nobody, almost nobody. I'm sure somebody would be, very happy, thank you, I couldn't figure out what to do. I'm glad I'm going to be, a brain surgeon, even though I don't know anything about it. But if the government was dictating things like that, there would be revolts. There have been revolts. And yet, curiously, when people think there's a God or a divine being or some cosmic consciousness or collective consciousness that has dictated a goal for them, they celebrate it. And that contradiction has bugged me for years.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that systems of belief, let's say, including religious systems of belief, can devolve into a kind of totalitarian rigidity. I don't think you can necessarily lay that at the feet of religious belief. I mean, human systems...
No, I'm laying it all at humans.
Yeah, I mean, right, it's okay, so it's fine. It's
I
broader
just view humans using religion in that way.
Yeah. So what do we do to close? Because I heard you said that we have to take questions.
Hey, we're going to take some questions. Because I could actually...
Sorry, I didn't mean to commandeer that. I was curious about timing.
You could have just as easily said it, and I'd be happy for another 5 hours talking, but then they'd charge us a fortune, and all these people who have questions that are better than the ones I'm going to come up with. So there's microphones actually up yes, where that guy, oh my gosh, he's lit up where we can see him. A couple quick notes about questions. And by the way, thank you, this has been great, and
thank you.
We'll talk some more. This is where I get to have a bit of fun. A couple notes about questions. For those of you who know, I do a live TV show where I can hang up on people, and if you think I can't hang up on you here, you are much mistaken. But I don't. I hope to never have to do that, and almost everybody's gone along. Questions end in a question mark, and the kind of questions we're looking for don't start with a dissertation or life story. So you can say your name if you'd like to. If you don't, that's fine, and then say who your question's for or both. And I will make a promise that I make every time and break, but I will try not to break it tonight, which is I will do my best to give shorter answers so that we can get to everybody who's asking questions. But they lit you up first, sir. Thank you, and the floor is yours for a moment.
All right, thank you. I guess this question's mostly for Jordan Peterson. Just to hopefully enlighten a bit more what you mean by God, do you think that if all humanity were to cease to exist, does God still exist?
I don't think I know how to answer that. It's just, the situation is too hypothetical. I mean, I can take a crack at some of it, but so human beings are characterized by consciousness and by self-consciousness, and the latter in particular seems to be something relatively unique. There's some vague evidence for self-consciousness of lower sorts in animals, but it's not very compelling. Some of them can recognize themselves in a mirror, but our self-consciousness is accompanied by elaborated imagistic and linguistic models of ourselves and that have been elaborated over large spans of time. There are lots of elements of being that would disappear if we disappeared. Now, and it isn't even obvious to what extent that's true, right? Because I don't really understand to what degree being itself is dependent on consciousness. Like the classic materialist Enlightenment view, which I would say is basically a 19th century view, something like that, is that if all consciousness was extinguished, the material substrate of the universe would continue unchanged. But I don't really buy that as an argument, because I think that the material substrate, I think that reality is I think that reality is an interaction between what we perceive of as the material substrate and consciousness itself. And so then when you destroy consciousness, you destroy reality. And what that leaves, I don't really understand, because it doesn't have any temporality in any obvious sense. It doesn't have any size in any obvious sense without the introduction of an invisible observer. So lots vanishes without human consciousness and self-consciousness. I don't know how to answer the question, does God vanish? Because that brings us back into the same problem that I was talking about earlier, is that it's not exactly easy to understand what people are talking about when they say God. You know, because when you ask the question, would God disappear? There's an assumption there that whatever God is understandable and boxable, like a simple concept, like a chair, and that we both share the same conception. And, you know, there's endless warnings in deep religious literature against assuming that you understand what that term means, or sometimes even for using the term. So that's the best I'm going to be able to do with that question.
Thank you.